Hello, everyone. I'm so happy today. I have such a special guest with me. I have with me one of my professors, Tal Ben Shahar, who is an author and a lecturer. He's taught two of the largest courses in the history of Harvard University, positive psychology and the psychology of leadership. His books have been translated in more than 25 languages. I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome, Tal.
Great to be here, Tanya. Great to see you.
How are you?
I'm doing okay, all things considered. These are challenging times, but okay.
I would imagine that the work that you do probably keeps you streamlined and more on track than the rest of us as we're struggling with these uncertain times.
Many people have been asking me recently in these difficult times. They would say, what is the relevance of happiness studies or the science of happiness when things are so difficult and challenging? One of my friends actually suggested, he said, Tal, maybe you should quarantine happiness for a while. And my answer to that is no, I actually do think it can help because the field can help us deal with good times, help us become happier. First and foremost, though, it's about cultivating resilience, the ability to deal with hardship. So I am using a lot of the tools and techniques from the field. And, one of the tools and techniques are that when you go through difficult times, accept and embrace it rather than fight and reject it.
I think that particular teaching was like pure oxygen at the time. I remember when I was studying the course. I mean, it was something that was unheard of because we are sort of raised in society and the schooling system teaches us to repress and suppress those emotions that are uncomfortable and just keep marching on, pretend nothing's wrong, and just keep on track. But what you taught was completely different.
Tanya, you're spot on in that from the time we're at school, we're taught to control our emotions. Even again, not with bad intentions. Parents who say, don't be sad or don't be angry, or in school we would be told the same, and it continues throughout our lives. In organizations, you don't express your emotions. It's all about objectivity and reason. And I'm obviously not against objectivity and reason. At the same time, we're not just rational animals. We're also emotional animals. And we need to give space for the full range of human emotions. And full range means emotions such as joy and excitement and love, as well as sadness and envy and anger and anxiety.
Mm-hmm. So, Tal, I'd love for you to actually talk a little bit about your Happiness Academy. I mean, it's a course that you teach, and I feel like you actually teach the tools, the skills. You've made happiness a science, and therefore so much more approachable and understandable. Could you just shed a little light on it?
Sure. For a long time, the whole field of happiness has really been dominated by the self-help or the New Age movement. And while there are many interesting ideas within self-help and New Age, they're not scrutinized by science. They're not tested as they should be. And here comes along the science of happiness and says, let's try these things out. Let's see if they actually work. Let's try them out in the lab. Let's try them out in the workplace, in the homes. And what it does, it literally takes intervention by intervention, technique by technique, and it tests it. And what works continues. What doesn't work is eliminated from the field. So today we have a science of happiness where organizations, where families, where individuals, couples, schools can take up these ideas, teach them, and through that help increase levels of well-being. Again, whether it's in good times, become happier, or whether it's in difficult times, become more resilient. And this is what I and many others in this field are teaching and are researching.
So I'm interested to also know, sometimes it feels like happiness, the concept itself, feels like such a fleeting phenomenon. Happiness is something that we're all trying to clutch at somehow, and we want to stay attached to it, and we want it to be a part of our lives forever. But it doesn't seem to be the case. Whereas you teach the science of happiness, is it more happiness then, or is it more being content with where you are in your life?
Yeah. No, that's a very good question and a very important distinction. Tanya, ultimately, what it depends on is how we define it. So, if people define, and by the way, this is the most common definition, if people define happiness as pleasure, oh, I'm so happy, having this ice cream, or I was so happy on the beach. I think that's unhelpful and even unhealthy definition of happiness, because it's temporary, because it's fleeting, because it is. There are very few prescriptions that we can give that will actually help in the long term. Yeah, go lying down on the beach. Yeah, you'll be happy for a short while, or have this ice cream. Yeah, in the short term, it's great. But if we can define happiness in a way that is deeper, in a way that is, then we can define it in a way that is more helpful. The way I define happiness, I see it as comprising 5 elements. The first element of happiness would be spiritual well-being. Now, spiritual well-being, of course, we can attain it through religion, or we can attain it through finding a sense of meaning and purpose in life. We can also attain it by being present in the moment, because when I'm present to a person I'm speaking with, when I'm present to a tree outside my window, then I'm very likely to experience the miraculous in the mundane, the spiritual in the material. So spiritual well-being is an important element of happiness. Then there is also physical well-being. There is a mind-body connection. Physical well-being is about regular exercise. It's about nutrition. It's about getting a good night's sleep or rest in general. I always say that even God needed a day off. And I think there is an important message here for us mere mortals. And the research shows that rest and recovery are important for well-being, for happiness. And then in addition to spiritual and physical, there is also intellectual well-being. Yes, we are rational animals too. You know that there is research recently came out showing that people who are curious, who ask many questions, who constantly learn, they actually live longer. So curiosity contributes to health, to longevity. So learning is important for well-being. Then there is relational well-being, number one predictor of happiness, quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. Relationships, not just with others, also with ourselves, is important. And then finally, emotional well-being. And that is, how do we deal with painful emotions when these arise, and they inevitably arise? And then how do we cultivate pleasurable emotions? Whether it's joy or fun or love or excitement. So these 5 elements, spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional, are the components, the elements that make up happiness. Now, we don't have to have it all. We can't have it all, certainly not all the time. But it's a helpful heuristic to think about as we look at our lives, analyze them through this lens. Okay, where can I improve? Where can I have more of what makes me happier? And by the way, these 5 elements also spell SPIRE: spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional.
Wow, that makes it easy to remember. But I want to talk a little bit about the spiritual aspect. I feel as if, and I've been studying Sufism and mysticism for a long time, and I find it very fascinating because I feel like the known world is beautiful as far as my eyes can see, but there feels like there must be so much more than the known world. And one of the things I have found is that there definitely seems to be a disconnect in our present time between our spiritual health our spiritual reality and the lives that we live. And perhaps that is also, I mean, this is just mere speculation, but perhaps that is also contributing to the level of discontent that people feel in their lives.
I couldn't agree more. Just living in the material world, as Madonna partially urged us to do, not enough. We need something beyond that. Now the question is, where do we get our fix of spirituality? And one of the things that I talk about a lot in when I talk about happiness is that we shouldn't just look at happiness through the lens of psychology. We need to expand it. We need to go beyond. We need to look at it through philosophy, as well as literature, as well as neuroscience, as well as religion. So one of the poems that I quote very often in my classes is by Rumi, who talks about the guest house. And what does he talk about when he talks about the guest house? He says, every day new thoughts and new emotions arrive at our door, and we need to let them in. Now, this is very wise. This is essentially telling us that we need to give ourselves the permission to be human, the permission to experience any and all emotions. He says, embrace those emotions, embrace those thoughts, don't reject them. Why? Because they are guests from the beyond. And just reading that poem raises levels of well-being. It connects you to the spiritual, to something that is beyond the material, perhaps the thing that we see right in front of us. So this is one example. In addition, people who recognize that there is more to life than just the material, be it physical wealth, physical beauty. If there is more than that, they're actually happier, and they're happier not just in the short term. They're happier across their life span. More than that, organizations that introduce spirituality into their midst. Many organizations say, oh, spirituality out. We want, again, the objective, the material, the quantifiable. But organizations that introduce spirituality into their midst in the long term, not only does job satisfaction go up among the employees, they're actually more successful. There's some wonderful work done by Raj Sisodia, who's a professor at Babson, and John McKee, who's the founder of Whole Foods. And they wrote a marvelous book on conscious capitalism, where they talk about the fact that the best organizations, of course, they thrive in a free market and they're successful. One of the reasons why they do so is because they have a strong sense of meaning and purpose. In other words, they're spiritual organizations. Profit, important, but that's a byproduct of doing something that you believe in, something that's important to you beyond just the profit.
That's a really incredible point. And it makes me wonder that this pandemic and the lockdown subsequently that has caused everyone to take a pause. And a lot of people are really re-examining their priorities and taking a look at their companies and how they're functioning and what the quality of their relationships are. It makes me wonder, will this pause actually create the kind of world that the utopia that we often talk about and write about and read about? Because it has been such a potent time to stop and think that the world has been marching on along. We've been, pillaging the planet, as it were, and suddenly, the air is cleaner, the environment is better. Could this perhaps be that moment that shifts things? Because what you're saying has so much value. This is such a valuable lesson, really, that we need to think about social capital in a sense.
Yeah, Tanya, as the saying goes, from your mouth to God, right? I don't know if this will bring about change. Yes, people are changing right now. I'm hearing these conversations more and more often where people say, we need to slow down. They also begin to be more appreciative of their loved ones, more appreciative of the simple and yet most important things in life. And yet, the question is, will this change last? And I'll give you an example. After 9/11 in New York City, some of my colleagues did research, and what they found was that New Yorkers displayed higher levels of empathy, more kindness, more generosity. They were nicer as a result of the collective trauma that the city went through. Well, right now we're going through a collective trauma on a global scale, and people are changing. The problem is that what happens later? 6 months after 9/11, New Yorkers were back to where they were before in terms of empathy, in terms of kindness and generosity. It didn't last. So, will this happen again this time? Again, this is a global pandemic. This is a global trauma. It's going on for a fairly long time. Who knows how long more? So maybe the change will be more lasting. I very much hope it will, because if it does last, then it would have been a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, as we study in the Tao, for instance, that where there's yin, there's yang, where there's darkness, there's light, and this thing has been such a horror on so many levels, with the amount of people that have lost their lives and fallen sick, that it would be heartening to know that there is perhaps a glimmer of a light somewhere.
Yeah, and you talk about the Tao. Khalil Gibran in The Prophet talks about something very similar. He says, yes, there is a dark side, and out of each dark side emerges light. We just need to be open to it.
So true. Tal, I'd love for you to shed a little light on the idea and the concept of permission to be. I feel like, when I took your course and I studied it, and this particular part of the training, I mean, most of it, everything stuck with me. It really changed the course of my life, as it did, I think, pretty much every student that took that class. But that concept of permission to be was such a new concept. And I think to this day it remains, because it is the one thing that we're not allowed. We're so trained to second guess our motives, our intentions, our actions. So trained to doubt. Self-doubt is so prevalent in our minds as we move through life. But this idea of permission to be I felt like I could finally exhale.
Mm. Yeah, so I'll share with you where I first thought about this idea. So the first year when I taught a class was I had 8 students. Two of them dropped out, left me with a broken ego and 6 students. And I was having lunch one day. I was a resident tutor in one of the undergraduate dorms. I was having lunch one day, and a student comes over and asks me whether he could join me for lunch. And he knew me, but I knew him, but he wasn't in the class. I said, sure. So he sits down and we start chatting. And then he said, Tal, I hear you're teaching a class on happiness. And I said, yeah, that's right, positive psychology. And he said, my roommates are in your class. 2 of the 6 students were apparently his roommates. So I said, that's great. And then he said to me, but Tal, now that you're teaching this class, you've got to watch out. And I said, what? And he said, Tal, you've got to be careful. And I said, why? And he said, because if I see you unhappy, I'll tell my roommates. And I actually used that the following day in class when I addressed my students, all 6 of them. I said, the last thing in the world that I want you to think is that I'm always happy, or that you, by the end of the semester, will experience a constant high. There are only 2 kinds of people who do not experience painful emotions, such as sadness or envy or anxiety or anger or hatred or disappointment. 2 kinds of people who do not experience these emotions. The first kind are the psychopaths. The second kind of people who don't experience painful emotions are dead. So if we experience painful emotions at times, it's actually a good sign. It means we're not psychopaths and we're alive. Good place to start. We can build on that. The problem in today's culture, and Tanya, this goes to your point, the problem in today's culture is that we're not given this permission to be human, this permission to experience the full range of human emotions. Why? Because, we go on social media, and what do we usually see on social media? Everyone doing great, amazing, going on this fantastic vacation, experiencing this incredible family time, loving their work, everyone except for me. And I see this and I feel completely inadequate when I see such a thing. But at the same time, I don't want to be the only one who appears to not be having a great time. So I put on the same facade, the same pictures, the same shares, the same posts. And what I'm doing is I'm contributing to what I've come to call the great deception. And it is this great deception that is leading to a great depression in our emotional landscape. Very high price. It would be so much easier. And again, Rumi wrote about this 800 years ago in the guest house. Today we have research by Viktor Frankl, by Daniel Wagner, who taught at Harvard when you were around, showing that when we accept and embrace these painful emotions, when we invite them as guests, they're much more likely to flow through us rather than to overstay their welcome, rather than only intensify. It's when we accept and embrace, that's when we're in the best position to actually fulfill our potential for well-being. So the paradox is that if we want to experience true happiness, we need to first allow in unhappiness. Once again, I go back to what Khalil Gibran talked about. The darkness and the light, there are two sides of the same coin. We cannot have the one without the other.
That's so profound. I have something to say. I have something to share about this mentality which turns to social media and looks at all these really picture perfect. Or I remember I learned the word Pollyannish in your class. Mm-hmm. These Pollyannish pictures, utopian. I also find that sometimes people say that there's enough challenges in life as is. So when I get on the internet, I want to get my mind off my depressing thoughts or the difficulties I'm facing or the anxiety I'm having. So it kind of, makes me feel better to see people on vacation or see something fun and comedic.
Yeah, so it's two parallel, well, actually interconnected paths that we're talking about. The one is what happens when I do experience painful emotions? When I experience painful emotions, the most helpful thing for me is to know that I'm not alone. Because, the difference between sadness and depression is that depression is sadness without hope. Depression is sadness without hope. So sadness is something we all experience, sometimes 10 times a day, sometimes for days. But if I have hope and I know that that too shall pass, then I'm okay. Then it will pass and I'll be fine. Now, when I see everyone else doing great except for me, that contributes to hopelessness, to helplessness, because I immediately think, oh, something's wrong with me. However, when I think, oh, it's okay, sometimes they're smiling in those family pictures and sometimes they're not having a great time. Wow, just like me. Then I have hope, even when I'm in the midst of sadness, that too shall pass. So that's one channel that's important to understand, that we're not alone. The second part that you're talking about is also about distraction. The fact that I'm feeling down doesn't mean that I now need to listen to music that further depresses me, even though that paradoxically sometimes helps, or be depressed by something else that I hear. Well, maybe when I'm going through a hard time, then I need some distraction. Distraction is not necessarily bad. Last night, I wasn't feeling great. So what I chose to do, I said I'm going to watch my favorite sitcom, which is The Big Bang Theory. And initially I didn't find it funny, and then gradually I thought, and it did become funny. So but by all means have distractions. At the same time, the belief, the mistaken belief that experiencing sadness or any painful emotion means that there is something wrong with me, that is very unhelpful. And that is what, unfortunately, is communicated through us, even if not explicitly, implicitly, through what we see around us.
That is such an important key that you've just mentioned. That makes so much sense. I also wonder, when you work with clients or companies or individuals and you talk about embracing emotions and welcoming them, such as in the guest house, the poem by Rumi, do you sometimes encounter people who say, well, I understand intellectually what you're saying, but I really don't know. I'm just cringing at the thought of facing my darkness or my sad emotions, because there is such an inbuilt aversion in us. We're just trained to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Are there any skills per se, or any techniques that you share with them that could help them sort of ease their way into the difficult place?
But what you're talking about is that, by definition, feeling sad is not fun. Feeling angry or envious is certainly not fun. And our natural inclination is to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So how can we even talk about, embracing, making them guests in our house? So here is the thing. And again, this is also something that both Sufi scholars talk about, as well as Buddhist scholars talk about. And again, there's a lot of overlap between these worlds. And they talk about two levels of suffering. The first level of suffering is inevitable. We go through it. There's really nothing that we can do about the first level of suffering. It's sometimes instinctive. Sometimes it's a result of things that happen in the outside world, and we're empathic beings, so we suffer as a result of it, whether directly or indirectly. So this is the first level of suffering. The second level of suffering comes on top of the first level when we reject the first level. So if, let's say, I see people who are suffering, and I experience pain as a result, empathy. Now, if I reject that pain and I say, well, I shouldn't be sad now because it's not helping them or it's not helping the world. I should be happy or display happiness. I'm just raising the levels of suffering even more. Because once again, when you reject suffering, it intensifies. I don't know if you remember this, but the experiment that I do in my class is as follows. I ask the class, and I'm actually asking whoever is listening now to do an experiment with me. For the next 10 seconds, do not think of a pink elephant. Do not think of a pink elephant. For the next 5 seconds, very easy, this Dumbo thing, don't think of a pink elephant. And of course, what happens? Most people think of a pink elephant. It's why? Because when we try to reject a natural phenomenon, that phenomenon intensifies. Whether the phenomenon is not thinking of a word that we hear over and over again, that's a natural phenomenon to think about it, or whether we reject a painful emotion, which is a natural phenomenon. So the first level of suffering is sadness or anxiety. Second level comes when I say I shouldn't be sad, or I shouldn't be anxious, or I shouldn't be envious, or I shouldn't be angry. We just create this second level of suffering. So this is what we need to keep in mind when we embrace and invite in painful emotions. And the question is, how do we do that? There are three simple, there are more, but I'll just mention three simple ways. One is to shed a tear, to cry, to experience the emotion, not to run away from it. It's no coincidence that after we usually feel a lot better after a good cry. And here I'm talking to, of course, women and men. There is nothing wrong, nothing problematic with shedding a tear. It's very human. In fact, you see this in Greek mythology. The heroes of Greek mythology, they cry, and they're heroes. So shedding a tear is a way of allowing the emotions to flow through us. Another way is by talking about it, whether it's with our best friend, or whether it's with a therapist or a coach, or whether it's with our partner or colleague, as long as it's someone we trust, someone who cares about us. Then giving ourselves the permission to be human, expressing our emotions around them is healthy and important. And a third way is through writing. There's a lot of research coming out of the University of Texas, Missouri, out of the University of Tokyo. So this is, a global research showing the impact of keeping a journal. And when we write down things, when we share our emotions in writing, that in and of itself can contribute to well-being. In fact, I'll share just one study which I find mind-boggling. This is Jamie Pennybaker from the University of Texas. And what he did was he invited people to write about their most difficult experiences for 20 minutes. And then the following day, they come in again and they write either about the same experience or something else for 20 minutes on 4 consecutive days. So a total of 80 minutes. What happened as a result of it was that when he measured many things. For example, when it came to physical health, they were actually healthier. Their immune system strengthened as a result of it. They became more social, more open, more generous and kind as a result of it. And he looked at anxiety, and anxiety levels initially went up. But then within a few days, it went down not just to where it was before, to a lower level, and then it leveled off. Even after a year, you still saw the impact of this very simple, straightforward intervention. Write about your most difficult or traumatic experience. And it's for your eyes only, no one else sees it. 80 minutes of intervention and anxiety levels go down significantly. Now, the interesting thing is, as I mentioned, is that it first went up. And it's this initially going up that people try to avoid. Okay, I'm going to suppress my emotions so that I don't feel anxiety. Yeah, maybe in the short term, maybe you can do it. In the long term, it has negative consequences. So either crying or expressing emotion in another way, like dance is another form of expressing emotion. Writing about it or talking about it.
That's so valuable. And I remember from this writing exercise, one of the things you had us do was keep a gratitude journal. And that I think, in tandem with writing about the difficult emotion that you're experiencing, is just it just starts to cleanse the mind and the heart, and the spirit starts to make you feel much lighter. And it just creates a healthier environment in the mind.
Yeah, good. I'm really glad you brought this up, because it also relates to something you talked about earlier when you said when you talked about, yes, permission to be human and also positive distractions. So yes, write about your difficult experiences. Cleanse yourself, and also write about the things that you can be grateful for, the things that you can appreciate. And we talked about spirituality earlier. One of the things that you find in just about every religion is the central role of spirituality. This is also one of the reasons why you see that in general, people who are spiritual are happier, because part of spirituality is about expressing gratitude. It is specifically about not taking for granted the things within us and around us. Albert Einstein once allegedly remarked the following. It's a quote that I have on my wall that I remind myself of all the time. He said, "There are 2 ways to live our life. One way to live our life is as if nothing is a miracle. The other is as if everything is a miracle."
So beautiful. I think one of the most profound things about this teaching is that, and then the work that you do, is that you really empower people, because we never take stock, take a moment to realize that so much is in fact in our control, really. I mean, we can direct our emotions. I mean, you taught us how to develop new neural pathways in the brain, practice certain things, 40 days, I believe it was, and you start to see new neural pathways develop in the brain. And this was really mind blowing for everybody, I remember, because we were not taught, we didn't know that you could actually change the course of the way that you think, your habits, and in effect, your life.
There's very important research by Carol Dweck from Stanford University on the fixed versus growth mindset. Fixed mindset is the belief that basically we don't change, whether we, in terms of how we are as how happy we are or how smart we are. So you're either born smart or not, or how successful we are. You're either a winner or a loser. Things don't change. Versus the belief that growth mindset, where you can grow and change constantly and consistently. Yes, you may have lost now, but may have failed, but you can learn from this and grow. You may go through a very rough patch in your relationship, but you can learn from this rough patch and reach happier times. You may be miserable now, but things will change. That too shall pass. This growth mindset is so important because it's the beginning. In a way, it gives you the fertile soil upon which you can flourish, or within which you can flourish. Whereas the disbelief in change, the fixed mindset, is a parched sand without the ability to grow.
Absolutely, it's barren, and in fact, having spiritual inclinations, you realize that the difficulties and the trials, tribulations that you come across in life are really there not because the universe wants to punish you, but it's more because you evolve through them. That's how you learn more about yourself. That's how you develop more capacity in yourself to understand, to fathom, and to be able to swim with the storms of life.
Yes, exactly. It's we undervalue difficulties and hardships. If I often ask my students, I say to them, okay, think back to the times when you really something important happened to you, when you gained an important learning or you grew and developed. Think back to that time, and then I ask them, okay, put your hand up if it was a difficult experience. 99% of the people put their hands up. Now, at the time when it happened, you would probably have given anything just for that to be over. And yet, in retrospect, you realize what an important lesson you learned as a result of it. I also say to parents, parents so often want to solve their children's problems. They want to alleviate any hardship, to do away with challenges. That's a mistake. Maria Montessori, the great educator, said, do not do for a child what the child can do for him or herself. And that's an important teaching, because children learn through struggles and hardships. Imagine you go to the gym, and in the gym, you put all the weights on 0 resistance so that it's easy. You're not going to grow stronger. We need resistance. We need difficulties. We need hardships. We grow through them. Now, of course, there can be too much of a hardship, and that's why, that's what parents are for, to be able to discern between when is it a hardship that the child can deal with, a challenge that they can grow from, and where do they really need me to intervene, where they really need my help.
And it's well worth our while to remember that human beings are wired for struggle. I mean, ancient man was living a much different life than the ones that we're living right now. We have all the amenities. We don't have to travel thousands of miles, hundreds of miles trying to get, just water. Or, now we have facility to journey through planes, whereas before they were traversing deserts on camelback and whatnot. So things are definitely much easier, but we are programmed to face struggle, to deal with struggle.
Yes, and what that specifically means that we're programmed to face it is, 1, that we're good at it. 2, that we need it. In order to lead a full and fulfilling life, we absolutely must have struggles. And a struggle-free life is not a happy life. It's actually, in the long term, it's a painful life of suffering.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh my God, this is so amazing. Tal, as always, just delightful, so delightful. Seeing you after so many years, you haven't changed a bit, by the way. And hearing your wisdom, it was just really heartwarming. And now you're teaching at Columbia, so you're not teaching this course at Harvard anymore. And your Happiness Studies Academy, I'm going to put the link of that below. So anybody who's interested in seeking out Dal's teachings, please do. They are life altering. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Tanya, and thank you for your very important messages. I've been studying or reading about Sufism, and everything I see there, just such treasures for our modern life today. I would even say even more important today than ever before. So thank you for that.
You're so welcome. Thank you for watching them. I felt as if religion is beautiful, but it was like the home with the walls and the pillars, and then mysticism in any tradition, really, whether it's Kabbalah or it's Sufism or it's Teresa d'Avila's teaching or Saint Francis of Assisi. I felt like those teachings were things that make that house feel like a home. They give the scent to the rose, as it were.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Tal, and I hope to circle back with you at some point and chat a little bit more.
I look forward to that.
Have a great day.
Thank you, Tanya. Take care.